Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's Monday afternoon, and it's time to start talking about corporate parenting. So, today we are tackling a leadership habit that's actually killing not only your engagement, but also your productivity. And we all know that productivity, loss of productivity, impacts our bottom line. Okay, I'm going to try this again. See if I don't have an echo. Here we go. All right. Okay. So I think the mic is working now. Let's start over. So, welcome everyone. Today we are tackling a leadership habit that is killing the engagement on your team. And most leaders do not even recognize that they're doing this. It's impacting not only your engagement, but also your productivity. It's and we all know that impacting your productivity is driving costs and impacting your bottom line, right? So I like to call this corporate parenting. If you've been around for a while, you know that this is a topic. This is a term that I have been using for quite some time to really discuss how it is that we are showing up in the work environment, how we are leveraging our tone to not only to guide conversations, to lead our teams, but it's also to directly impacting how it is that your teams engage with you. Now, if you don't know me by now, I'm Christina Green. This is the this is the Generational Edge podcast, and I am your generational translator in the workplace. I love everything generations. We go from everywhere from traditionalists all the way down to even Gen Alpha, who will be entering the work environment in just a few handful of years. Now, actually, the topic we're talking about today, I am going to be delivering on stage live this week at the DC chapter for the Society for HR Management. And but if you can't make it, I actually would love to connect with you to understand how it is that we might be able to support you. I'm going to be offering some exclusive Q&A with just my subscribers. So stay to the end. I'll give you a QR code. Connect with me. Become a subscriber. Understand. Get the materials. I give out lots of free information to my subscribers. So let's dive right into corporate parenting. We all know this intuitively. Parenting isn't leading, right? Shaking of the fingers, the using of forceful tone, right? Making decisions for professionals as opposed to being more collaborative. That's not what leading is, right? But if you've ever felt like your team perhaps maybe are tuning you out, maybe they are dragging their feet with getting deliverables done or executing on task, or maybe they're giving you the polite, "Uh-huh," and rolling their eyes either in front of you or behind your but behind your back. Listen, all of these things are indicators that you might actually be leaning into parent mode rather than being a leader, right? And this is easily done in the work environment because it's hard for us to leave our who we are personally. It's hard for us to leave that person at home while we step into our professional lives, especially when we're leaders. But being aware of this actually can help us to start to take some steps in the right directions. Now, what does corporate parenting kind of sound like? Well, it sounds kind of like being a nag, right? No one likes to be a nag, and no one likes to be nagged at, right? So it's just this constant reminding your team of what they're supposed to do, kind of treating them like they're children who have forgotten to do their chores or maybe might forget to do their chores. This is taking on the full accountability, the emotional burden, if you will, of making sure that they do deliver, right? So it's hand-holding them to the point of constantly reminding them of what they're supposed to do. This is annoying. None of us like to experience this. Micromanagement. This is when we're hovering. We're hovering, we're double checking, we're making sure that everything that they're doing is in fact correct. We are everything, every point that they're executing. So we're kind of micromanaging all of the little details instead of we're managing the how and not the what, right? The what is the outcome. The what is what we've requested for them to do, how they execute. Now, there is a difference between helping to develop someone and completely micromanaging the process, right? If you give a responsibility, a task, a deliverable to your team, empower them with the tools and the skills to be able to execute. Let them fill in the gaps and also to let them have the accountability to come back to you when they have questions, right? That's where growth, that's where growth happens. Next, maybe we are over explaining. And listen, micromanagement, over-explaining, these are 2 things that I have been guilty of, and it is a constant awareness to be able to move through this with my team. One way is to keep an open dialogue with your team. When you create that psychological safety, they are willing to share with you and to say, "I actually already know that, so I don't need you to tell me." Right? Or and just to say it in a safe space. But the over-explaining is when we might be lecturing, right? We're holding the mic. Instead of sharing the mic, we are pontificating, right? We're standing at the podium and we are giving a lecture as opposed to requesting insight, asking for input, collaboration from the group. Maybe we're drowning them in the details, right? Those details are typically tiptoeing into the how. And then lastly, there's bossing around, right? No one enjoys being barked at, right? Being told orders and sternly spoken to, even if you're just delivering information, but you're basically telling them exactly how they're going to execute, exactly what they're going to do. You are not leaving it open for any opportunity for them to leverage their own creativity to decide how they're going to approach solving the problem, right? Or executing the task. You don't get buy-in from them when you're bossing them around, when you're barking orders. They become then taskmasters instead of professionals. And you hired professionals, not taskmasters, right? And then lastly, babysitting their accountability. It's chasing them, and making sure that they get over the finish line, right? It's making sure that they much like we would do with our children, making sure that they have, maybe if they've forgotten their homework, we run it up to the school, we finish it for them, or we we do not allow them safe space to be able to fail. It's failure is a part of life, and if we do not allow people to fail, they never get to experience the opportunity to grow in that environment, right? So if any of this sounds familiar, then you can admit, right, that this is exhausting, not only for you, but trust me, your team is exhausted. If you are doing any of these things, then your team is tired, they feel overworked, and they certainly feel disrespected and undervalued on your team. So, if there's only one reason to do this is to improve not only the productivity on your team, but to improve the morale, right? To lean in a way that is intentional, that's going to get your team more engaged. Now, growth is part of the process. So when we let them rise to the level of expectation, rather than trying to get them to uh, uh, get or trying to complete the task for them, we're allowing them to grow in a safe space, right? Because growth happens when we start to let go of this control, the control that we actually don't have any. All right. Well, who the heck am I and why am I talking to you about this? Well, listen, as you heard me say before, I have been in this micromanagement phase. I have been in this over explaining, thinking that, oh, I'm just providing greater detail. I'm just trying to make sure that they are successful. Listen, I bought into this corporate parenting many years ago after I spent 2 decades, over 2 decades in healthcare and in leadership, and it cost me so much. It cost me great talent, people who I really enjoyed working with, but I hovered over them. I second guessed them. I doubted them, right? I stifled their growth and mine by leaning in a direction where I hired someone to do a job, but I clearly could never trust them fully to do it because I was always over their shoulder. Right? I doubted their capabilities simply because I had a difficulty letting go. right? This is hard to admit, but it's also too, it's part of the process of understanding this is part of the growth, right? We start to recognize the things that we need to change in ourselves and start to use it as a way, as a vehicle for how it is that we start to approach progress moving forward, right? I've been that leader. I've been a leader who's micromanaged, who over-explained, and who lacked that trust, and it cost me greatly. And I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was absolutely wrong. But now I get to help leaders just like you, right? To learn from my mistakes and learn from the mistakes that we can unveil in our conversations, right? The awareness that comes with recognizing that we didn't have not done everything perfectly, right? Because that in fact doesn't exist. But how can we learn from those examples, right? Learn from those experiences to be able to guide us forward, right? Because when we stop clinging to these outdated leadership norms, which are which essentially were just forced upon us, right? This idea of corporate parenting is accepting things how they've always been instead of evolving in that process, right? People start to understand, they grow, they stay, they grow, and then they also too momentum starts to build. This is how you start to repair some of those retention challenges, right? Some of those succession pipeline challenges that you might be having, right? This is how you get people bought into your culture of your organization. Is how you start to set the tone and the pace. Now let me show you how. So why corporate parenting is a problem, I think you've started to understand, but let's just make sure that this is super clear, right? Employees start to feel shut down and they start to withdraw. They start to disengage from the work. They start to do minimum only. And we also to know this term, quiet quitting. They are moving in that direction, right? They begin to do the bare minimum and execute only what is asked, right? They treat work as if it's a deposition. They answer only when asked a question, and in which case it becomes a minimal answer, right? They also to stop thinking for themselves because you essentially have told them everything or how they should think by micromanaging, by over explaining. You're not leaving any space for creativity, for growth. So, and if perhaps maybe they think you are not open to hearing their perspective because you're so involved in your own, they're not going to provide it. They're not going to think critically for themselves. This is going to foster an environment where people cannot grow, right? Where people start to shrivel up and actually start to exit because no one wants to be in an environment like this. And then they just stop caring. You could have the greatest mission in your organization, but if you do not have leadership that is supporting a culture, that's supporting a collaborative environment, then people are going to stop caring. And that mission is no longer going to be the reason that they are there. That mission is going to be, in fact, one of the reasons that they choose to leave and or perhaps maybe to start to bring about change, but typically through, you know, complaining, if you will, amongst one another, as opposed to trying to solve the problem, right? They won't necessarily volunteer to be part of the solution. Now, corporate parenting is also to experienced very differently amongst the generations. These are just a couple examples, right? So as Gen X, I'm a Zennial Gen X, if you will. On the Gen X side of Zennial, if you know what Zennial is, I've explained it in a different time, but I will. Gen X really kind of feel resentful, right? If they feel micromanaged, if they feel that they're being over-explained to, if they feel that there's too much hovering that's going on, they aren't going to just shrug it off because as a generation, we have been very used to being dismissed, right? And so they will, but that resentment will exist, and it will impact how it is that they show up in future projects, initiatives that you're doing, right? They'll let it go, but it more so it'll just become beneath the surface. Millennials will completely disengage and feel like there's absolutely no growth here. There's my voice is not heard. I don't have a seat at this table. I cannot share my ideas openly because my leader fills and fill in the blank, right? This is they start to feel so they pull back. and you will see them absolutely disengage as well as disconnect. They will self-terminate, they will leave, they will resign because they do not feel supported in that environment. Remember, millennials are looking for that pathway to leadership, and Gen X is as well. But uh, millennials are usually very vocal about it, about how, or, questioning, how do I get to that next level? If they stop asking those questions, then chances are they're probably disengaged from either you as a leader or maybe the organization, or maybe both. Now, Gen Z, listen, if there was ever I don't really care, there's, and maybe that's not saying it right, but if there were ever a generation that did not feel the responsibility to try or to be loyal to any organization simply because for any given reason, it would be Gen Z, right? And part of that is because much of the Gen Z population are actually children of the Gen X population, right? And we've raised our children to feel empowered, to feel that their voice has a meaning and that they should share that when it's necessary. And also, too, to know when to cut their losses and not waste their time. So, Gen Z is not hanging around. Remember, if you've heard me on one of my prior conversations, you understand that Gen Z does not have the level of responsibility that many of the generations before them. They do not have all of the student loan debt that perhaps we might have for Gen X and or for millennials. So they've not necessarily bought into this idea of the American dream where they have to take on, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of loans, either to go to school, to buy a home, perhaps their idea of what the nuclear family looks like. All of that is shifting. And so their approach to work is also too part of that shift. So they're not going to stay around for what they may perceive to be disrespect, right? So, okay. So now let's keep going. So, and for HR, this really shows up. You start to see these metrics. You can quantify this, right? Because it shows up in their retention rates or their attrition rates. How frequent are people leaving, resigning? There's typically a higher spike and to some extent of attrition after bonuses are are distributed, right? So, but the question is, what what is the reason for people to stay? And people stay because they have a culture that they enjoy being part of. They have leadership that they feel confident in following. They have roles that either meet the needs of their personal lives, right? So we've all started to adjust from maybe a hybrid model, maybe working entirely remote. All of these things are important to your employees, and so HR is able to see these analytics in real life, in real time, right? They also too are noticing what it sounds like when they're hearing complaints either from leaders or from employees or both. How is this how is this showing up? What are leaders complaining about, amongst, within their sphere of influence? The same thing for employees. What is their experience within the culture within the organization? Now you also too, they'll see this in the engagement surveys, right? So maybe there's low engagement or low marks in certain areas, certainly around morale. How are people feeling about the work that they're doing, their contribution to the overall vision, mission of the organization? A lot of this is quantifiable in those reports. And then what does their leadership succession look like, right? Are they able to train and actually home grow leaders and move them into leadership positions? Do they have training programs that are supporting this? Do they have mentorship programs, right? So all of this is telling them, or do they have people who are even asking them or interested in these types of programs? If if your staff is not seeing that this is a priority for you as an organization, they're also too not going to probably stick around, especially the millennials and the Gen Z, because if they do not see that there is a career path that they can develop there, they will not stay. They will not feel that they can grow with your organization. Now, what can we do about it? There are 3 shifts that you can start to make today that will help you to move from nagging to being collaborative, right? Or to providing more clarity. So there 3 shifts we're gonna talk through today and how you can start to change your behavior as a leader in order to, foster a more inclusive, a more productive, and a more cohesive team. So first, moving from nagging to clarity, right? So setting your expectations once. Now, right, this is back to the example where we're not hovering over them and making sure that they are getting things done, that they're executing on the job that we've asked them to execute, that we give them the expectations, we provide them with the clarity once, we give them the instructions once. If they have questions, of course, please respond to those. It's not a hard, fast rule, but it's about making sure that we're not constantly checking back in with them to make sure, "Are you done? Are you done? How's it going?" Providing guidance and direction is one thing, but providing constant oversight and constant reminding them of what they are in charge of, that is when you start to create the friction, right? So strive for the clarity and not necessarily for the control. Trust that your team is going to trust that they are capable of not only meeting your expectations, but exceeding them, as well as understanding that when they have a question, when they run into challenges, that they also do feel safe to be able to come back to you and ask you those questions. Now, next, moving from micromanagement into trust, right? As a control freak, this is challenging, very challenging to do because we need to understand how it is that they are going to uh, how it is that they are going to execute. In order for us to feel that we can trust them, we start to feel that we have to micromanage. But here's how to remove that, how to shift in that mindset. You need to let go of the small stuff, right? So not managing the how, managing the what, right? The expectation is that they have all the tools and they've been clear, they know what's expected of them, and they know how to do this. So back away. Let them choose how they're going to approach it. Will they stumble? Quite possibly. Will they succeed? Quite possibly, right? So lean into the assumption that they will succeed, that they will be successful. Check for the outcomes, not for the task. We do not need to manage at the level of detail, right? Did you get all the formatting complete? I need to see this level of detail. That now there are, of course, different management styles, right? Where you do need to lean in with some more than others. But when for the most part, when you've already had open and honest conversations about the opportunity, right, where people may need to develop, or you can lean in there. But when they've not proven that they deserve to have the micromanagement, give them the opportunity to have the creativity to move forward, to design the how, the execution for you. Seek the development, not the control, right? Seek to develop the person, right? And not to control them throughout the process. There's a difference in how it is that we lean in each of those areas. All right. Now, lastly, is moving from lecturing to a dialogue, right? Moving from the podium to a round table. Lead by asking questions instead of being just directive and telling all of the answers to the test. Ask the questions. Let the team, let them come up with the answers. Let them problem solve, right? Even if they come to you with a challenge, with an issue, ask them questions about what tools do they need to help them feel more confident in making that decision, right? Who do they need access to that might be able to help them in collaboration? Right? Invite them to provide their input, to use their critical thinking to understand how to solution and problem solve in this, right? Create a space for solutions where solutions are open. This is not a right or wrong. When you create that psychological safety, people feel comfortable and being able to explore what that looks like for them and to test it with you and to see if you're willing to let them try that out. You've gotta let them spread their wings, right? At some point back if you've ever taught your kid how to ride a bike, how they fall. That happens, right? And some bruises are worse than others, but there's a learning that comes from the fall. both for the parent as well as the child, right? So in this scenario, we've got to be able to take our hand off the bike and let them roll up the street, 'cause that's when they start to grow and move into a new phase of childhood, right? So moving from over management, micromanagement, over explaining into collaboration, right? And into solution orientate, sorry, to collaborative solutions being invited into a collaborative space. Okay. Now, in summary, so this these are 3 shifts you can do today, but I want you to ask yourself, what is one thing that you can commit to? One thing you can commit to exploring and possibly implementing today, right? Because nobody likes to nag. Nobody wants, and as leaders, we do not want to nag, but we tend to lean in when we think that there's a misunderstanding, when we think that there is a lack of understanding or a miscommunication, right? When we might doubt the capabilities of someone, I'll tell you, release the reins. And maybe what the constraint is the fact that you're holding on to them as opposed to just allowing them to be free, right? So, one commitment that you can make to one of these, is it moving to clarity? Is it moving into and through trust, right? Learning how to trust your team. Perhaps maybe if it's inviting a dialogue versus lecturing. So, just commit to one. Okay. All right. Now, when we get this right, the shifts when we make these shifts in our behaviors, when we start to change, our teams will notice. They will start to flourish in a way that we haven't experienced before. We'll see higher retention rates. We will see team confidence start to grow. People will start to feel that they are accountable for not only for their performance, but for their participation and contribution within the team. And also too, you'll start to see that your culture will start to shift. People, your retention rates will increase, of course, but people will start to feel better about doing the work that you've hired to do. Teams, they stop acting like what we consider to be, yeah, kids, right? Waiting for direction. They start to be critical self-starters, right? Critical thinkers and understanding how to solve problems. They start showing up as the professionals who they are, right? Because they will own their own results. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be diving more deeply into corporate parenting and sharing some real world examples and a full framework with the DC chapter of the Society for HR Management later this week. But if you can't make it to Washington, DC, then that's not an issue because I'm hosting an exclusive subscriber only replay and a live Q&A with all of the materials, all of the goodies that I share with my subscribers. I'm going to be hosting that in the coming weeks. If you want to be part of that mailing list, if you want to know more about how we can start to dive more deeply into this, because I've even got some great ebooks and tools that people are going to be able to use to start to assess this within their organization. Use a QR code that's on the screen and let's connect, right? Just be part of the community and understand how it is that you might be able to learn something to start applying to your teams today. All right. Well, thank you for hanging out with me today. I'm Christina Green, your generational translator in the workplace, and this has been the Generational Edge podcast. And listen, let's stop parenting and let's start leaning in as the leaders that we are. And until next time, I will see you soon. You take care.